The story begins with a boy named Rio finding himself in a strange white space without knowing where he is. While looking around, a man emerges from the clouds and tells him that, although this isn't the afterlife, he unfortunately lost his life in an accident. Hearing this, Rio remembers being hit by a truck and asks if the man is God, but the man replies that he is more like an angel, and since he never reveals his name, Rio casually decides to call him Fake Michael. Michael then explains that Rio will be reincarnated in a different world called Fee, but surprisingly, he has received no special mission or task, so he is free to live however he wants. Rio thinks about it and says he would like a peaceful and quiet life, which Michael accepts without any problems. He continues by explaining that Fee is a world where only about 20% of the population can use magic, depending on their natural elemental affinity. And in Rio's case, his strongest element will be water. Since he asked for a quiet life, Michael has already made the necessary preparations. He tells him that a small house has been set up for him in the Rondo Forest, protected by a magical barrier to ward off monsters. As part of his starter kit, he will also receive 2 guides, a knife, and a food supply sufficient to last 2 whole months, giving him everything he needs to start this new life without worries. After that, Rio opens his eyes inside his new house and looks around. He finds a cold chamber made of ice that runs on magic, stocked with meat, along with a bathing area and some other good things Michael mentioned. He flips through the guides and realizes that, although he never learned this world's language, he can read it without problems. Once he finishes checking the place, he goes out to experiment with his magic. He casts a water ball spell and watches a sphere of water form in his hand. After trying a few more times, he realizes that saying the incantation isn't necessary, as long as he clearly visualizes the spell in his mind. Later, he goes for a bath, expecting to enjoy hot water, but quickly discovers he can only create room temperature water. So he decides to try lighting a fire the old-fashioned way. Unfortunately, his first attempt fails completely, as his arms aren't strong enough for the job. Not wanting to give up, he tries a different approach. He thinks about using sunlight to light the fire, and starts imagining water molecules grouping together to form ice. Basing this on the little he remembers of Earth's chemistry, he focuses on hydrogen bonds, and somehow it works. After that, he manages to form a piece of ice shaped like a lens, and uses it to concentrate sunlight, finally lighting a flame for his bath. While bathing, he wonders if it would be possible to use science to create hot water directly as well. The next morning, while having breakfast, Rio starts thinking about his plan for the future, because once the food runs out, he will have no choice but to go into the forest and hunt. So, he decides to start training his magic seriously. He goes out and tries to launch a water ball at a tree, but it barely leaves a mark. Hoping for better results, he switches to a water jet spell, but the result is equally disappointing. Remembering Michael's words about imagination being the key to magic, he continues practicing every day, and over the following weeks, Rio begins to improve slowly. Once satisfied with his progress, he starts trying to create some ice spears. He manages to form them, but they simply fall to the ground without hitting anything. And although the shape and speed still need work, he keeps practicing. Eventually, he manages to produce ice spears almost instantly, but they still lack adequate force or aim. Figuring a change of pace might help, he crafts a spear using his knife and heads into the forest. On the way, he hopes to collect some quartz that he can use to help light fires at night. As he explores, he finds clear rivers, open spaces, and even spots some quartz stones near the bank. Feeling good, he decides to collect some herbs and head back. But at that instant, a lesser boar bursts from the bushes and attacks him from behind. It looks like the end for him, but at the last second, Rio remembers how he died before and refuses to let it happen again. He quickly dodges to the side. The boar turns to attack again, but Rio reacts fast and casts a layer of ice on the ground, making it slippery. The boar loses its balance and starts sliding towards Rio, who launches several ice spears right in front of it and lets the boar collide with them. The ice spikes pierce the boar, and thus Rio achieves his first victory. After that, Rio butchers the monster and returns home. There, he flips through the monster guide and discovers that the terrible lesser boar he faced was actually the weakest monster listed. As he flips through the pages, he notices the last two are marked as special editions, so he skips ahead to check them first. One page describes dragons as powerful creatures capable of destroying entire cities, and the other talks about beings called Kuma. The book clearly states that they are not fallen angels and simply advises him to pray he never encounters one. The next morning, Rio sets off for his second trip into the forest, finally leaving behind the worn-out clothes he brought from Earth. This time, he finds some fruits and starts enjoying the moment. But just as he climbs down from the tree, a huge bird monster suddenly appears and attacks him. From the book, he recognizes it as a killer falcon, a creature that can use air cutter, which is an invisible type of wind magic. But the monster's true danger lies in its razor-sharp beak. Rio starts running backward, defending himself from the air cutters by launching walls of ice into the air, but soon realizes he might not be fast enough to escape. He fires multiple water jets at the falcon, but it dodges them all with ease, and then prepares to finish Rio off using a diving skill. But just before the bird hits him, Rio forms an ice shield in front of him, and the bird ends up colliding with it and falls near Rio. Rio tries to finish it off, but the bird recovers quickly and flies back with an eye injured from the heavy impact earlier. It looks at Rio, recognizing him as its rival, and then flies away into the distance. After it leaves, Rio falls to the ground and thinks about how this quiet life thing is much harder than he expected. Furthermore, all the running left him completely lost in the forest, and he has no idea where his house is. He continues wandering through the night and stumbles upon a glowing lake surrounded by a silent stillness. And in the middle of it, he sees a headless man calmly petting a headless horse, which he recognizes as a Dullahan. After this encounter, Rio finally finds his way back home, and as days pass, he continues to train hard. He finally manages to master his ice spear spell, strong enough to take down an enemy with a single hit. Along with this, he starts fishing and improves his defensive ice barrier magic. On one of his trips, he visits the ocean and tries to swim, but ends up narrowly escaping a curious octopus. His efforts slowly start to pay off, and he develops a new spell called Abrasive Jet, which is a technique sharp enough to cut through solid rock. One night, feeling more confident with his skills, Rio forms an ice blade and returns to the forest to challenge the headless Dullahan. He wonders if this being is even a monster, or if it is simply too advanced to appear in the beginner's guide. Without thinking about it further, he charges in, and the two begin to fight. They clash their swords a few times, and at a certain point, Rio thinks he can win with one strike. But the Dullahan simply defends with his hand and attacks him from the side, nearly cutting Rio in half, but he blocks with a quick ice shield. After losing the fight, Rio falls and thinks he still isn't prepared to defeat someone like him. But for some reason, it seems the Dullahan is acting like a silent teacher. After that, he gets up, and the Dullahan shows Rio how to forge an ice sword correctly, and eventually hands him his own blade, as if telling him to master it. Rio accepts immediately, and watches the headless warrior return to the lake. The next day, while Rio rests in the forest, a large black bird suddenly descends from the sky. He quickly recognizes it as the same killer falcon he fought before by the scar on its eye, and wonders if it has evolved. The monster suddenly launches a strong air cutter attack against him, and it takes 5 ice shields to block the attack. Rio quickly realizes the monster is much stronger than in their last meeting. He prepares to block its dive attack with 10 ice shields, but the bird breaks through all of them with ease. Rio continues blocking its air cutters with his weak ice walls and tries to counterattack with some ice spears, but the bird simply dodges them all and retaliates with a magic negation skill, which instantly nullifies Rio's magical ice shields. He barely dodges the attack unharmed and thinks what a nasty skill that is. In that instant, the bird hits him with lightning, and once again, Rio dodges the attack by a hair's breadth. The monster follows up with a claw attack, but Rio draws his sword and defends. After that, he continues fighting with his sword, cutting through the airstrikes and defending against the bird's huge talons. Next, the killer falcon prepares to launch its final attack, but instead of fleeing, Rio stands firm like a true swordsman and manages to strike the bird in the neck as soon as it enters his range, while dodging to the side. As the creature falls, Rio approaches and thanks it for the fight and for helping him get stronger, pushing him to his limits. He then takes his sword and says that, out of respect for their rivalry, he will end this now, and finishes the monster by pulling his sword. After that, he starts heading back home, but a huge red dragon suddenly appears and lands right in front of him. It tries to speak via telepathy, and when it sees that Rio can hear it, the dragon seems satisfied that the connection worked. Without wasting time, he asks if Rio has seen a large black bird in the area. Rio hesitates and then nervously admits that he might have defeated it, thinking it was a threat, and quickly adds that he didn't know it was important. To his surprise, the dragon doesn't seem angry. In fact, it seems more impressed than anything. As his eyes turn to the sword at Rio's waist, he recognizes it immediately as the Fairy King's blade and says Rio must have done something to earn his favor. Seeing a chance, Rio decides to ask the dragon some of the questions he had been saving since arriving in this world. The two begin to talk and end up spending the entire day in dialogue. As the sun begins to set, the dragon suddenly remembers he needs to return home before his wife gets upset with him for staying out too long. And just before leaving, he finally introduces himself as Lewin. Meanwhile, high above, Fake Michael is reviewing the details of Rio's reincarnation and realizes he forgot to note a hidden trait on his tablet. He wonders why Rio would have one, considering he doesn't even have a mission, and thinks about how it's been 10,000 years since he last saw someone with another trait, mentioning a girl from another world. And then he reveals that in Rio's case, he has the hidden trait of eternal youth. The next day, Rio starts craving seafood and heads to the coast. Upon arrival, he finds a ship wrecked along the shore, which seems to have been destroyed in a storm. As he searches through the wreckage, he finds a lifeless body, which makes him sad. But at that instant, he hears a faint moan nearby and finds a man barely clinging to life. So, Rio quickly takes the injured man back to his house and treats him. Sometime later, the man dreams of the shipwreck that dragged him to the coast and wakes up wondering if he is still alive. He turns and sees his belongings carefully placed on the table beside him and gets up to leave, looking around the unfamiliar environment and silently wondering where he had ended up. Rio soon comes out to see him, relieved to realize he is awake. The man is shocked to realize he couldn't sense Rio's presence behind him and wonders why he is dressed so poorly. But then, he decides to show respect to his savior and introduces himself as Abel and thanks him. Rio seems cheerful at first, but then apologizes, saying it is a pity that Abel was the only one to survive. Abel doesn't seem very affected and explains that the others were smugglers anyway. No need to worry about them. In that instant, his stomach begins to growl. So, Rio introduces himself and invites him inside for a meal. While eating, Abel discovers that Rio has no clothes because he couldn't make thread. When he asks why Rio didn't buy some from a nearby town, Rio explains there isn't a nearby town or even a single person living in the area. Hearing this, he asks if he also hunted the food they were eating, pointing to his knife. Rio says yes and creates water inside a jar, revealing he is a water mage. Seeing this, Abel says it's impressive and that even in the central provinces, only half the population can use magic, although he personally cannot. This surprises Rio, since Michael had told him only 20% of people can use spells. Soon after, Abel asks Rio if he can take him to the coast to confirm something, and Rio agrees. As they make their way through the jungle, Abel asks if Rio uses a staff. When Rio admits he doesn't have one, Abel assumes it's because of the hard life he is living. Thinking Rio might not be very useful in a fight without a staff, Abel says he will take the lead if they encounter monsters. Rio tries to ignore it, but Abel insists and says he can't keep being the only one who always gets saved. So, in the end, Rio agrees. When they finally reach the coast, they realize the smugglers' bodies have disappeared. Rio suggests they were taken by monsters or dragged by the tide. Abel comments in a low voice that he would have met the same fate if Rio hadn't saved him. He then asks Rio to drop the formalities and stop calling him Mr. Abel. Rio argues that Abel is older than him, but agrees nonetheless. And from that moment on, the two begin to feel more like friends. Abel climbs down from the wreckage and tells Rio that, unfortunately, he couldn't find what he was looking for. Rio then asks what he plans to do next, and Abel says he wants to reunite with his allies, and for that, he will need to go to a city called Loon. But he isn't sure where they are now, and worries the ship might have drifted too far south. Rio admits he has never heard of Loon, but is sure they will have to travel quite far north. Abel then makes a bold request and asks Rio if he can accept this as a job and come along as his guide. After a brief pause, Rio says he is fine with being the guide and suggests they leave tomorrow as he needs some time to prepare. Later that night, Rio starts getting ready to go into the jungle. When Abel sees him and asks why he is going out so late, Rio replies that he wants to say goodbye to someone, and they only appear at this time. Abel starts to wonder who it could be, since Rio told him earlier that no one else was there. But then he decides he must be going to pay respects to someone who passed away, and it is probably better not to pry too much. Meanwhile, Rio arrives at the usual spot and calls for the headless fairy king. He tells him he will be leaving the Rondo forest for a while and thanks him for all the help he has received so far. Before leaving, he asks for one last sparring session and gives it his all. After the duel, the Fairy King pulls a freshly folded suit from the water and hands it over as a parting gift, which Rio accepts with gratitude. The next day, he wears the suit and prepares for the journey before leaving with Abel. On the way, they encounter a lesser boar. Abel charges in and easily defeats it with a combat skill called Total Impalement. Seeing this, Rio is impressed and asks what move that was. Abel figures a mage wouldn't know about combat skills and explains they are special techniques used by people who fight with weapons like swords and spears. The rest of the day is spent walking, and when night falls, they rest inside the trunk of a large tree. The next morning, they continue their journey and find a group of lizard men in their path. Abel seems cautious and says it would be risky to face them in the swamp, so they decide to take a different route through the forest. As they walk, Rio quietly tells Abel that the lizard men seem to be following them. With that, both prepare to fight, but Abel is still worried about how Rio will handle combat without a staff. But before he can say anything else, Rio steps forward and casts Ice Spear, taking down 4 lizard men in an instant. Rio tells Abel to stay alert as more enemies are approaching, and in no time, the two finish off the rest of the lizard men. After the fight, Abel looks and asks about the spell Rio just used, impressed with how he managed to launch 4 ice spears with a single incantation. Rio casually shrugs and says these things are pretty normal when it comes to water magic, and then offers him a cup of water made of ice. Abel notices that Rio uses a different incantation this time to summon water and asks about it. But Rio brushes it off with a lazy excuse and says Abel must be imagining things. As they keep walking, Abel pulls out a bronze coin and shows it to Rio, explaining it is the only foreign bronze, which is the currency used by the Kingdom of Nightly, where the city of Lune is located. Rio lights up at the mention of the kingdom's name, and Abel explains it is one of the 3 kingdoms in the central provinces, besides the Debui Empire and the Handel-Yu Federation. Rio immediately makes a face upon hearing about the D Empire and says the name sounds silly, and there is no way he would want to be called a citizen of a place with such a ridiculous name. With that, they keep walking and reach some open fields. In that instant, a piece of rock flies towards Abel out of nowhere, but he cuts it in half and realizes they stumbled upon a nest of rock golems. Hearing this, Rio starts to wonder why the golems don't look humanoid as he had imagined. While Abel advances and uses his total impalement skill to open a hole in a nearby golem's body, it regenerates immediately and forces him to retreat. Seeing this, Rio tells Abel he wants to try something new and casts 10 walls of ice in the shape of a massive ice cube and drops it from above, crushing 2 golems in a single blow. Abel stands there in silence, watching the scene unfold, wondering how the battle ended so quickly when fights like this should never be so simple. But Rio makes it look effortless. Once they take down the last golem, they realize it stopped moving after stumbling and falling on its side. Rio wonders if they absorb power from the earth using the huge magic stone at their base. And Abel says this one must have defeated other monsters in the area and absorbed their XP, as its magic stone is bright and quite large. After that, they take the stone as loot, and Rio says he wishes he had collected the stones from the other golems too, but unfortunately, he crushed them all under his ice cubes. A short time later, they find a giant creature resembling a hippopotamus, and Abel identifies it as a behemoth. Rio wonders if they should take it down, but Abel immediately advises against it. In that instant, they notice a group of wyverns flying towards the behemoth and wonder if they got front row seats to an epic monster battle. Abel thinks the behemoth is at a clear disadvantage, but Rio corrects him, saying it might not be defeated so easily. At that moment, the massive monster lets out a thunderous roar with magic negation effects and knocks down all the wyverns at once. Later that night, while camping, Rio teases Abel about wanting to see round 2 between him and the behemoth, but Abel immediately rejects the idea, calling it ridiculous. He then mentions magic negation again and says he has only heard of traps with that kind of effect being used inside dungeons. The word dungeon immediately catches Rio's attention, and he accuses Abel of hiding all the fun things from him, asking if there is anything else he hasn't mentioned yet. Abel replies by asking if Rio knows anything about elves or dwarves, and the way he describes them aligns perfectly with what Rio already knows. And Abel reveals there is an elf in Lune as well. The next morning, as they continue their journey, Rio says that as soon as they cross the mountains, they will enter human territory. This makes Abel pause for a moment and ask how Rio knows something like that. The truth is, the red dragon told him, but instead of saying that, Rio just deflects and calls it knowledge beyond human understanding. And somehow, Abel lets it slide without questioning him further. As the two walk calmly, a giant griffin appears out of nowhere, startling them and leaving them paralyzed. Thinking fast, Rio throws a piece of meat into the air and tells Abel to do the same. The griffin accepts the offer and flies away without causing trouble, letting the two let out a huge sigh of relief, knowing that if it had attacked, they wouldn't have survived to tell the tale. Abel says there is definitely something wrong with this place, as no human has reported seeing griffins or behemoths in centuries. But Rio just shrugs and says those humans probably weren't looking hard enough. As they continue, they find a group of wyverns enjoying their meal. Abel points out it would take at least 20 experienced adventurers to face a group like this, and even then, there would still be heavy casualties. But Rio argues that since they entered wyvern territory, they will have to deal with them anyway, sooner or later. He convinces Abel to go through with the fight and asks if it would be easier if he could pin them to the ground. Abel says that would make killing them easier, as he would be able to reach them with his sword. So Rio advances and casts ice spears onto the creatures, letting Abel finish them off. After that, they continue using this combo to take down every wyvern that appears in their path, and manage to collect a bunch of large green magic stones from them. Abel wonders how they managed to do this so easily, but before they can enjoy the victory, another wave of wyverns appears seeking revenge. And this time, it is Abel who jumps in first, already becoming a battle junkie thanks to Rio's bad influence. As the two finally emerge from the monstrous mountain range, Abel looks around and wonders where they ended up, noting they definitely went quite far north. Rio gives a tired but honest answer, saying anywhere outside the D Empire is good enough for him. And Abel reassures him, explaining the Empire is even further north from where they are now. At that moment, Rio spots a road running east to west. As they head towards it, Abel looks back at the imposing mountains with a slight air of unease, then gestures to the path heading west and says it should lead to the city of Kaladi. The idea of a real bed improves both their moods, and Abel gives a strong recommendation for the local food, stating it is worth the trip alone. That night, the two arrive at the guild, where Abel tells Rio to go ahead and register. He explains the guild card can be useful in many ways, and will even cover his entry fee, reminding him that he already paid a silver coin on his behalf and acted as his guarantor this time. Rio jokes that it sounds like part of a shady plan to recruit him as his servant, but Abel scoffs at the idea, saying a cheap trick like that is far beneath him. And then explains the real advantages of being registered with the guild, like being able to sell magic stones and monster materials at better rates. Otherwise, he says, Rio would have to go around looking for an alchemist just to make a sale. At that moment, the waitress brings a plate of curry rice. Rio suddenly remembers all those isekai stories he read where the hero had to work hard just to taste curry. But here he is, eating it without lifting a finger. The moment he takes a spoonful, he loves the taste and becomes euphoric, even asking for a second serving. The next day, as they leave for Lune, Rio starts playing the victim again and accuses Abel of hiding yet another secret from him. He acts like a prince, demanding answers, this time asking Abel if he is also hiding some delicious sweets from him. Shortly after, the two arrive in the city of Lune, where a guard named Neimer is visibly excited to see his lost comrade. Abel gives full credit to Rio for helping him return alive, and Neimer thanks him personally. Abel even covers Rio's entry fee, and the two head straight to the guild. There, Abel tells him he might even rank up in his registration just by being with him. When Rio asks what that means, Abel explains that normally everyone starts at rank F, but if someone has the backing of someone above rank B, they can be promoted to rank D. Hearing this, Rio says he is proud, as this must mean Abel has a pretty high rank. Abel then talks about how a higher rank comes with perks like better paying jobs. But with the amount of magic stones Rio collected, money shouldn't be a problem anytime soon. In fact, he is worried that if they tried to sell them all at once, it might even crash the market. Still, he remains positive, saying the guildmaster should be smart enough to figure that out himself. After that, they enter, And as soon as the two step into the guild, the receptionist practically screams Abel's name, and the whole place lights up at the sight of him alive. Everyone rushes over as if he were a celebrity. Surrounded by familiar faces and old friends, Abel is quickly pulled into the crowd, while Rio smiles discreetly and walks out, thinking he might just be in the way. On the street, the city's only elf passes by him and immediately notices the robe Rio is wearing. When he asks if something is wrong, she replies she was just admiring the robe, calling it remarkable and saying he seems like an interesting person. She then excuses herself politely, saying she has an appointment, and adds that she hopes they meet again. As she disappears down the street, the guild door opens and Abel comes out looking for Rio. The moment he spots him, he grabs him and pulls him back inside, introducing him to everyone and calling him his savior. He then announces that Rio will register as an adventurer, and the crowd welcomes him warmly, thanking him for saving their friend and taking care of him. Abel then takes our boys straight to the receptionist and asks her to register him at rank D under his endorsement. The request clearly takes her by surprise, since no one from the Crimson Sword has ever personally endorsed anyone before, and that alone says a lot about how valuable Rio must be. Although the receptionist seems to understand the weight behind it, she still mentions the usual protocol and says they will need to test him first to confirm his skills. Abel asks to speak with the guildmaster to sort this out, along with a few other things, so the receptionist arranges it and tells them to wait in the meeting room. The moment the news spreads that Abel is alive, the guildmaster rushes in and falls to his knees in relief. Abel runs to help him up, apologizing for making him worry so much. The guildmaster, however, won't have it and starts venting about how he went through absolute hell since finding out Abel had disappeared. Eventually, his eyes land on Rio, and he asks who the mage is. Abel introduces his savior once again, and the guildmaster responds by introducing himself as Hugh. He then thanks Rio, who replies saying he was just in the right place at the right time. Abel then mentions Rio's endorsement for rank D, and when Hugh asks if they have any proof to back that up, Abel says Rio is much stronger than him and casually dumps all the high-grade monster stones onto the table and tells the guildmaster they got them from the monsters they defeated along the way. Rio takes a moment to process what he is seeing before realizing they are wyvern stones, and judging by the quantity, it would have taken a full army to take down that many. Abel says he has something even scarier to add, revealing they hunted these wyverns south of the Evil Mountains. He tells Rio he realized this after looking at the road to Talati, and Rio immediately points out it sounds like the kind of name made to warn people to stay away. And the guildmaster confirms, saying no one has ever left that place alive, and most people wouldn't even approach the area unless they had no other choice. Abel then argues that this alone should be more than enough to justify Rio's promotion, and the guildmaster agrees. At that moment, Abel's teammates appear, and his mage, Lynn, falls to her knees. Abel runs to the door and apologizes for making them worry. After that, the guildmaster tells Abel and his companions, Lynn, Rhea, and Warren, that they can have the room to themselves, and tells the receptionist Nina to bring the necessary registration materials to his office along with Rio. As soon as Rio leaves, Abel calls him and asks him to wait at the reception after his registration, as there is a place he wants to take him afterward. The guildmaster then takes Rio to his office and tells him that Abel's group, the Crimson Sword, is the strongest party in the city. Rio then asks if he should really start at rank D, but the guildmaster tells him not to worry, saying that although Abel is a prodigy, he knows for a fact that even Abel couldn't take down an entire swarm of wyverns alone. He then pats Rio on the shoulder, saying this means he must be really skilled, and then gets a bit surprised at how well-built he is for someone supposed to be a mage. At that moment, Nina returns with the registration materials and begins. She formally introduces herself as a clerk of the Loon Adventurers Guild and starts the interview. After asking some basic questions, she informs him that once registered, he will be eligible to stay in the guild accommodations for up to 300 days. When she hears he has never been in a dungeon before, she recommends the guild's monthly beginner course and encourages him to participate. Rio shows more interest than expected, and as soon as the interview ends, she asks him to place his hand on the crystal to complete the registration. To his relief, it doesn't explode or shatter like in anime scenes with overpowered isekai characters. Everything went well, and thus, he receives his official guild card. After the two leave, the guildmaster lets out a deep sigh, able to relax a bit now that Abel is back. With his workload piled up since Abel disappeared, he now feels genuinely relieved and silently decides he owes Rio one for bringing him back safely. Meanwhile, after completing his registration, Rio meets up with Abel again, who pulls him along to collect the reward for the escort mission. On the way, Abel offers to buy him proper clothes and maybe even a staff, but Rio isn't sure why he would need one and asks about it. But Abel casually says he just assumed all mages use staffs. Rio shrugs and says he is fine casting magic without one, and then adds that he fights up close using a sword. This surprises Abel, as he has never seen Rio carrying one. So Rio draws his blade, but to Abel it looks more like a large knife than a sword. As they walk, Rio starts asking some basic questions about the world and finds out that the days of the week, the number of hours in a day, even how they measure things in centimeters, everything is exactly the same as Earth. And with curry already being a common thing here, it seems too specific to be a coincidence. Putting the pieces together, Rio realizes someone else must have been isekai'd to this world long before him. Once they finish shopping, Abel takes him to the celebration party for his return. The next morning, Mana shows Rio the way to the guild accommodations, while he complains about drinking too much at the party the night before. Naina tells him the party hosts, didn't want Rio to leave early, as they considered Abel a brother and felt deeply indebted to Rio for bringing him back. Shortly after, Rio is taken to room number 15, where he will share the room with two other boys his age. The more energetic one introduces himself as Nils, while the quiet blonde is named Ito. As soon as Nils leaves, he immediately starts talking about how cute Naina is, making it very clear he has a serious crush on her. But Ito tells him directly he has no chance, especially with all the competition out there. But Nils remains confident, saying it is every guy's dream to succeed and win a beautiful woman. Hearing this, Ito doesn't bother arguing and turns to Rio, asking if they can keep things informal and friendly between them. At that moment, Mita returns and introduces a new roommate named Aman, who looks a bit younger than the others. Before leaving again, she reminds Rio to be ready the next day along with Aman, as both are scheduled for the training session in the dungeon. Meanwhile, Abel is struggling to convince his team about Rio's abilities. Lin argues that the ice wall is clearly a water spell, but it is so thin that even a basic air cutter should be able to get through it. She says making it thicker and dropping it on golems sounds more like something out of a fairy tale. While Lin continues to resist, Rio steps in to calm her down, reminding her that Abel is just sharing what he saw. Lin eventually backs down, but still refuses to believe that taking down wyverns with ice spears is possible, especially since those creatures are protected by wind barriers. Ria then mentions that the only mage known to perform feats like the ones Abel described was the legendary Infernal Mage. She admits Rio seems like a rare find, but also shares her concern that if someone like him allied with the Burke Empire, it would be a serious threat. But Abel doesn't seem worried, and when asked why, he says Rio hates the name debut, which sounds so silly to the rest of the team. Rio and the new kid Aman start their first dungeon exploration course together, and after 5 days of lectures, the teacher finally wraps up the theoretical part. With that sorted, it is time for practical experience, so he announces they will go to the first layer of a real dungeon. Hammond immediately starts panicking, but Rio tells him to calm down, warning that if he keeps stressing like that, he'll end up exhausted before noon. Before they leave, the teacher opens up for questions, and Rio raises his hand. He asks if it is possible to instantly teleport to a dungeon lair after it has already been cleared. The question, clearly inspired by his knowledge of isekai anime, catches everyone's attention. The teacher seems a bit surprised, but admits he is impressed Rio knows something so specific. Unfortunately, he explains that this kind of feature is just a rumor said to exist in the southern provinces, and the dungeon in Lune has nothing like it. Evan turns to Rio, clearly impressed, and says he is surprised he knows that, adding that Rio really deserves that rank D. Once everything is ready, the teacher leads the class toward the dungeon while sharing a bit of its history. He explains that the entire city of Lune was built around this dungeon, and that every few years the monster population inside increases dramatically. This event is known as the Great Monster Tide. During this time, monsters reach the surface layer, which is why huge double walls were built to stop them from spreading into the city. Hearing all this, Amon looks a bit uneasy, but the teacher reassures him, saying the monster tide only happens once every few years, and there is no sign of it happening anytime soon, so the rookies have nothing to worry about. Upon reaching the entrance, he points out a guild counter positioned right at the start of the dungeon and explains that every adventurer has to register their name and time of entry before going in. Rio notices Amon is still struggling with his nerves and tells him to take a deep breath to stay calm. Once they enter, the teacher informs the class they are free to explore on their own, since there are no dangerous monsters nearby. As Rio and Amon move deeper into the dungeon, Rio suddenly senses a monster and tells Amon to get ready, saying he will trap it with magic so Amon can go for the kill. Moments later, a soldier ant appears, and Rio quickly explains the easiest way to take it down is aiming for the base of the neck. He then fakes an incantation and fires 8 ice spears, pinning the creature in place and giving Amon a clean shot to finish it. Afterward, Rio shows Amon how to extract the magic stone from the monster's body. And once that is done, the two head back to celebrate their first successful expedition. That night, the roommates throw a small party, and Ito congratulates them for managing to take down a soldier ant on their first try. Amon humbly admits he only managed to land the final blow because Rio had already pinned the ant. But Rio casually dismisses the credit and lets Amon enjoy the spotlight. When Amon asks what they plan to do next, Amon says he is ready to go back immediately, but is afraid to go alone. Rio says he plans to go to the 3rd floor and offers to go together. The group then starts wondering why a soldier ant appeared on the 1st floor when that level is usually filled only with weak monsters like bats. Ito comments there have been several recent reports of stronger creatures appearing on the 1st and 2nd floors, which makes Rio question what monsters like that would be doing there. At that instant, Abel makes a dramatic entrance and casually explains that soldier ants can indeed dig their way up to the upper floors. After that, he formally introduces himself to Rio's roommates and makes a tease, saying Rio clearly has serious personality issues and asks them to keep an eye on him. Hearing this, Rio shoots back, asking if he is really that desperate to start a fight. Meanwhile, the others suddenly realize who they are talking to and freeze. Nils suddenly stands up and nervously introduces himself as a swordsman, saying that as a rank F adventurer, he sees Abel as a true hero. He feels honored to shake his hand, which Abel humbly accepts, telling him to keep working hard, but not so much that he burns out. Brill then asks why Abel is around so late, and Abel explains the quest his group took lasted much longer than expected. Right on time, his team shows up clearly annoyed that he is still stalling instead of reporting to the guild. Abel claims he is just doing his job as a responsible veteran, helping guide the rookies. Lynn tells Warren to handle him and the guy hoists Abel over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes and leaves without saying a single word. After that, Lin approaches Rio and stares him directly in the eyes, before turning and leaving without saying absolutely anything. Rio quickly apologizes for the unexpected intrusion and says their leader was urgently needed. As the Crimson Sword Squad walks away, she starts scolding Lin for being rude and tells her to stop staring at Rio. But Lin says if Rio really is that high-level mage, then there is no way she wouldn't feel interested. Hearing this, Abel says soon they will see what his savior is truly capable of. The next morning, Amon walks to the dungeon with Rio, and once inside, the two encounter a pack of wolves, but manage to take them down without major issues. After that, they sit down to catch their breath, and Rio mentions Amon's fighting style reminds him a bit of Abel's. Amon says he learned from his teacher named Kiro. Back in his village, he used to be an adventurer who learned at a great academy called Homeschool, although he isn't entirely sure. Rio tells him not to overthink it, and that if he keeps it up, he might even catch up to Abel one day. Hearing this, Amon points out Rio is also quite skilled with the sword, especially for a mage. And Rio explains he was lucky enough to train with someone a long time ago, although he doesn't know if he can consider himself a master, as his style is quite original. Before moving on, he gives Amon some tips on stamina control and consistency, saying he traveled with Abel for quite a while and he always practiced his forms first thing in the morning. Amon listens attentively and says he would also dedicate the same effort into his training. The next day, Rio decides to take a break from the dungeon and goes to the library to learn more about alchemy. The librarian gives him a quick tour and points out where he should start. Later, as he leaves, the sky suddenly starts to darken and, looking up, Rio realizes it is an eclipse. But he feels something isn't right. At that exact moment, a powerful fire spell hits him from behind, and he barely manages to block it with a quick cast of multiple ice walls. As the fire dies down, a demi-human appears, and, from her appearance, Rio guesses she might be one of those Akuma mentioned in the special pages of the monster guide from his cabin, and, judging by her strength, he calculates she is probably as strong as a behemoth or a griffin. He considers running away, but the woman gives him no chance and attacks him with another fire spell. At first, Rio manages to hold his ground, but then she hits him with a wind spear and strikes his shoulder. Rio quickly draws his sword and retreats, grateful the Fairy King's cloak saved him from a serious injury. This also surprises the Akuma girl, who says it is already impressive he can withstand her hellfire, but being able to nullify her wind spear was true madness. That is when her eyes fall on the cloak he is wearing, and she asks if they are from the Fairy King. She then draws her sword and says she will have to cut him down the old-fashioned way, and charges with a strike. Rio also draws his blade and meets her with a clash, and both begin to trade blows. At one point, the Akuma manages to nearly cut Rio, but he dodges backward and hits her with several ice spears. The girl runs, dodging all of them, as the eclipse begins to fade, and Rio wonders if she is using wind magic to boost her speed. At that instant, the Akuma jumps with a heavy strike, forcing Rio to block it with his sword. She then kicks him back and asks why the Fairy King would trust someone like him with his cloak and sword, and asks who he really is. After that, she creates a fireball, but before she can finish casting her spell, Rio disables it with his ice magic, leaving her shocked at how fast he can conjure. She calls him a monster and then charges with her sword. Rio defends all her attacks and hits her with several ice spears, but she melts them with a wall of fire before summoning some earth walls from the ground as shields. Taking advantage of the rising dust, Rio hits her with several water jets from the sky and manages to injure her a bit. After that, he advances to finish her off, but the Akuma breaks through the wall in front of her and meets Rio's attack head-on. During the clash, Rio notices her wounds are healing very fast, while she pushes him back into a building. She then prepares to hit him with a fireball, but Rio has her surrounded with several drops of boiling water. As the scalding rain falls on her, she lets out a scream and protects herself with an earth dome before exploding out of it, with a crazy expression looking at Rio. She then charges and notices the eclipse almost ending and tells him she is running out of time. It is sad because she can't remember the last time she had so much fun fighting someone. She then introduces herself as Leonor before asking who he is. Rio responds with his name and calls her Akuma, which makes her pause. She is surprised a human even knows about her kind and mutters she should have eliminated him when she had the chance, although she admits it probably wouldn't have been possible anyway, not with the time limit still in effect. Turning to leave, she tells Rio that given his strength, he will definitely face other Akuma and asks him not to die before she can kill him herself. Once she is gone, Rio lets out a long sigh and mutters that if it weren't for the Fairy King's cloak, there would be a hole in his shoulder right now. With his whole body aching, he decides to get some books from the library after withdrawing some money, and when he checks his account, he finds an absurd amount in it and wonders how much they made selling the wyvern stones, and says at least now he doesn't need to worry about money for a good while. After that, he goes back to his room, but when he opens the door, the place is empty. Curious, he goes to the window and spots his friends being ambushed by a fellow adventurer named Dan and his gang. Dan starts barking at Rio's friends, spewing stupid logic that he is helping them train for ambushes because monsters don't send invitations before attacking. But then the people with him suddenly fall, and we see Rio standing nearby. He tells Dan he certainly didn't expect him to warn him before attacking, and asks if he is ready to run away with his tail between his legs. Hearing this, Dan tries to punch him, but Rio simply dodges to the side and hits him with the hilt of his sword, making him fall. Rio then goes to Ito and tosses him a potion first, figuring he can take care of the others with his healing magic as a priest. After that, everyone goes to the local bathhouse, where Ito heals Rio's wounds and wonders who could have landed a blow on someone so strong. The others lean in, curious too, but Rio just dismisses it with a lazy smile and says he will tell them about it another day. He then leans back and enjoys the bath while thinking about Leonor and how she mentioned there were others like her. But then he decides to relax, saying he earned a break for tonight. The next day, Amon returns to the dungeon with Nils and Ito by his side. The three head straight for the fifth lair, where Amon takes point and takes down a goblin archer. After he finishes the monster, Ito uses minor heal on him and treats the small wound. Ito then argues that goblin archers shouldn't even be appearing on the fifth lair, and something about this feels strange. Mills chimes in, sharing something he learned from Abel, saying survival should always be their top priority. He then suggests they go back to the surface and split their earnings 3 ways. As they start the walk back, Amon finds himself trying to convince him they should form a party with members of similar skill levels so everyone could contribute fairly and grow stronger together. Meanwhile, Rio traveled outside the city to practice alone. He thinks about the incredible magic Leonor had used and realizes casting speed was the only area where he could match the Akuma. He decides to work on his weaknesses and turn them into strengths, so he is ready the next time they face off. Rio also feels a touch of jealousy towards the creature, thinking about how she instantly closed the distance and appeared right in front of him. He wonders if that was a true example of wind magic and starts imagining creating something similar using water magic. The first spell that comes to mind is Water Jet, so he decides to try it out. Rio casts an ice bomb in front of him, steps on it, and visualizes 256 water jets exploding from behind to propel him forward at high speed. However, the attempt fails miserably. He calls it a day and wonders if using more than 1,000 jets could have made any difference. Upon finishing his training, he decides to go to the library and look for knowledge related to Akuma and alchemy. As the story progresses, Lynn is already sitting in the library, flipping through books of forbidden spells. And one hears that she can't find any magic capable of forming a thick wall of ice in midair, or the ice spears Abel once told her about. She gives up as she stands, thinking not even her master Hilarion would be able to handle spells like those. And if anyone could, it would have to be someone like the Empire's infernal mage. In that instant, Sarah appears and comments it is strange to find Lynn in a place like this. Lynn replies she came looking for something, then asks Sarah if she has been away from Lune on a mission for royal duties. Sarah tells her she just returned from her mission and makes an excuse and leaves, saying emissaries are already waiting for her. Meanwhile, the trio arrives at the guild and heads straight for the reception desk, where Naina seems surprised to see them back so soon. While Nils can't express himself properly because of his crush on Naina, Ito shows her the magic crystals they collected, which makes her realize they came from goblin archers, which shouldn't be on the 5th layer. She quickly runs to inform the guildmaster and also puts a notice on the guild board, thanking the three for the valuable information. As Naina explains everything to Hugh, he immediately senses the danger, knowing such monsters usually appear only after the 10th layer. He asks Naina how many rank B teams are currently available, and she tells him there is only the Crimson Sword and the White Brigade. The guild leader then asks her to summon both at once. Shortly after, the Crimson Sword arrives at the guild, and Abel doesn't look pleased to hear the White Brigade is also there. They enter Hugh's office, and when they get inside, the White Brigade is already waiting. Their leader, Phelps, greets Abel warmly, and Abel returns the greeting. Hugh wastes no time and gets straight to the point. He quickly thanks both parties for responding to his request, then mentions the report about the goblin archers. Abel asks if the information is reliable, and Mr. Hugh explains the trio returning with the crystals is proof. The guild leader then informs them their task will be to enter the dungeon and check for any signs of the Great Tide Boar, which refers to the explosive growth of monster populations inside the dungeon. Mr. Hugh explains the last one occurred about 10 years ago, and the recent signs they received might be enough to confirm another is approaching. He offers them a generous reward for checking this and shares all his plans, even mentioning he has already notified the Lord about the situation. The guild leader makes it clear he doesn't intend to treat this lightly and asks both parties to leave by the next morning. Mr. Hugh also informs them he has issued a notice to temporarily close the dungeon. Both groups quickly rise from their seats and accept the request. The next morning, Rio wakes up early and leaves, while the others are still getting out of bed. He mentions he plans to visit the north side of a library, hoping to find more advanced material than available on the south side. Amon points out there are forbidden texts available there too. But Ito reminds them Rio would need to be at least rank B to access them. After wishing him luck, Rio heads toward the library. And while climbing the stairs, he finds Sarah standing there, reading a book. Meanwhile, the Crimson Sword and the White Brigade gather near the dungeon gate. When Abel asks Phelps why he brought only 20 adventurers, Phelps explains he selected only those ranked above C, which makes up half the brigade. Abel considers it a wise choice and nods in agreement. Just as the guildmaster is about to open the dungeon gate, Abel suddenly stops him, sensing an unusual presence coming from inside. He then asks Lynn to confirm using her wind magic. Lynn casts a wind spell called Probe and reveals there are well over a few hundred monsters waiting near the entrance, which is more than enough to confirm the Great Tide Boar has already begun. The guildmaster immediately orders everyone to fetch the knights and alert the entire area. An emergency quest is posted in the guild, and everyone quickly rushes to fulfill their roles. Returning to our hero, Sarah seems pleased to see him again. She asks if he is a local adventurer, then formally introduces herself, saying she had a feeling they would meet again. She continues asking what he is doing in the library, and Rio almost lets slip he is looking for books on Akuma, but quickly changes his answer to alchemy, explaining he wants to eventually create a golem. The girl replies that is quite an ambition, and although she can't think of any books like that nearby, she asks him to walk with her, as she might have something that can guide him. As he follows her, Sarah asks if he likes reading, and Rio tells her how much he loves books, saying that since he has been reading for a long time, he feels a bit nostalgic whenever he visits this place. He then asks if she is an elf, and if she is the only one in town. Sarah explains she is the sole member of a rank B group called The Wind, and that she is a bit unusual since elves generally don't stay in human settlements, but she thinks it was good she did, because that's how she met Rio. While Rio and Sarah peacefully enjoy their conversation in the library, chaos begins to spread through the city as crowds gather in a circle around the dungeon and wait for monsters to emerge. The dungeon doors are forced open, and what appears next is a swarm of mutant goblins. The guild leader immediately orders everyone to attack with arrows and spells, but the goblins keep advancing without slowing down. Watching the knights join the fight brings a wave of relief to Abel, as he realizes they are the Marquis's Loon Knights. Kyle comments he is glad he had a meeting with Commander Neville earlier, which allowed them to prepare in time. However, watching the massive wave of goblins pouring out, Hugh starts to get anxious, knowing last time wasn't nearly this serious. As the battle continues, the leaders of the two guild groups do an excellent job coordinating everyone. Even so, the situation becomes dire when Lynn points out they have already run out of arrows. Neos quickly brings a new supply, and also delivers a message from Hugh to Abel, telling him there must be a large goblin monster hiding behind the front line, and he wants the Crimson Sword to take it down. Everyone keeps fighting until dawn, and by then, most of the goblins are eliminated. The guild leader quickly orders the two rank B groups to position themselves and defend the wall against the giant monster approaching from behind. The two teams move in perfect sync and easily cut through the final wave before advancing to face what they presume to be the last threat, a single goblin general. But at that exact moment, 3 of them appear instead of 1, which clearly signals the final boss will be a goblin king. Abel calmly shares his plan that he and Phelps will take on 2 of the generals, while Rhea and Sheena handle a third. He hopes they can end the fight before the king arrives. The team quickly gains the upper hand against the generals, but just before they lower their guard, Abel suddenly shouts for everyone to get down. A violent air cutter tears through the battlefield, blasting the 3 goblin generals and launching them away with a single blow from the Goblin King. Abel is stunned that such power came from just a casual arm movement, and even more shocked that the king willingly sacrificed his own men. Without wasting time, Abel charges in with Phelps and attacks using his impeccable shadow sword skill, followed by a royal impalement, but not even that manages to finish off the beast. Phelps starts to panic, but Abel calls Lynn to use her bullet rain. Luckily, his plan works, and the attack rains down perfectly, bringing the Goblin King to his knees, finally ending the chaos. Back on the surface, Sarah and our hero remain completely oblivious to the fight taking place. They say goodbye after spending a pleasant evening together, without a clue about the storm that had just passed. That night, when Rio arrives at the Adventurers Guild, he feels confused seeing everyone celebrating for some reason. Meanwhile, the guild leader has just finished all the paperwork he had to deal with because of the tide bore, including funding requests and evaluations of the adventurers who participated. The old man finds the work exhausting, feeling overwhelmed with every thought. After some time, Rio finally finds out from his roommates that the adventurers are celebrating the Great Tide Bore. Neos explodes with enthusiasm, talking about Abel's remarkable achievements against the Goblin King, explaining how Abel gave the signal to Lynn, after which she unleashed one of the most powerful wind spells called Bullet Rain, and how Abel even managed to dodge it. When they admit not being sure how he managed it, Abel himself appears and explains the skill he used was a sword technique called perfect shadow, which allows the user to evade all kinds of ranged attacks. At that moment, Lin and Rhea, Abel's teammates, arrive saying they were looking for him everywhere. Rhea comments she was sure the leader would be with Rio, then suddenly complains to Rio that he should have been present during the Tide War. Lin then asks if Rio is really capable of creating an ice wall in mid-air. Rio nods and says yes, but explains his current limit is about 40 meters. He adds it took a lot of time and effort to reach that level. Realizing this is far beyond what most people could achieve, Lin gets curious and asks if it is an original spell. She explains that, from what she knows, most mages simply recite incantations created by others instead of developing their own. Rio replies he has a different way of thinking, as he argues incantations are purely a matter of personal preference. His answer leaves Lin surprised, and while she stands there shocked, Rio excuses himself and goes to eat something. As Rio leaves, Abel explains to Lin that the boy casts spells without using incantations, although Lin simply cannot understand. The next day, Rio's roommates arrive at the guild, but since the dungeon is closed for a month, they can't find a single job. When Rio passes by and asks what they are doing there, the trio explains their situation. They then ask Rio why he is at the guild, and Rio tells them he was looking for an ore to practice alchemy, but currently it is out of stock. While the three comment on how expensive the ore is, Rio couldn't care less after all the money he accumulated. When the trio starts looking dejected, Rio decides to cheer them up by offering them a job. He tells them to look for a place outside the dungeon where copper ore can be found. The three mention an abandoned mine near the village of Rousset, which is about half a day's walk away. After hearing this, Rio offers them 4 gold coins each and says he will pay them even if they come back with nothing. He also offers 25 gold coins for every core they bring back, with the only condition being that they all return alive. The trio is overjoyed and asks if he is really okay with paying so much extra. But Rio explains the guild might not consider this an official achievement, since they aren't working for it. Even so, the three hurriedly accept the job. While Rio enjoys a quiet moment alone, he hears a noise outside and goes to the window to look. He sees a group of knights intimidating a girl and ordering her to bring them drinks. They try to drag her into some dirty business when a man named Dan steps up to defend her and pushes one of the knights. The knight gets angry and draws his sword, saying that although he doesn't intend to kill him, he will teach this adventurer a lesson and even calls him trash. Just as he is about to attack, the knight trips and falls, and tries to get up but falls again. At that moment, Phelps of the White Brigade arrives to save the day and tells the knights to be ashamed of what they were trying to do. The knights try to play tough, thinking Phelps is just another adventurer, until he reveals he is a noble and heir to the House of Heinlein. One of the soldiers realizes they picked a fight with the former commander of the Royal Knights, and the group quickly flees without causing further trouble. Afterward, Dan and the girl thank the leader of the White Brigade, and Phelps praises Dan for stepping in to protect her. He asks Dan to escort the girl to her friends, and once they leave, he turns his attention to Rio, who is still peeking from the window. After a brief exchange of greetings and introductions, Phelps says Abel spoke very highly of him, and that the Boar title would have been easier with him along. He also comments on how interesting Rio's magic is, noting he realized the knights slipped because of it. As the captain walks away, Rio wonders why a marquis's son would choose to become an adventurer. That night, while Rio eats dinner, Abel shows up to join him. Rio makes it clear he won't pay for his meals, but Abel replies he doesn't expect that from a rookie. After Abel orders his usual dish from the waiter, the two somehow start talking about Abel's love interests. When Rio asks about Lynn, Abel says she already has a crush on Warren. Rio doesn't see how that would work, but comments love can overcome a small height difference. He then asks if Rio sparked Abel's interest, and the man literally freaks out like an embarrassed high school student. Abel quickly changes the subject and asks if Rio is willing to help him with something. He then takes Rio to the streets and starts explaining that one of the investigators sent to Loon is an old acquaintance of his. This investigator brought several guards with him, and among those guards, some are a total mess. Therefore, Abel wants to track them down before they can cause any trouble. As they talk, Rio notices a group of suspicious-looking adventurers. They decide to follow them and are led into an alley, where they are suddenly ambushed. Rio easily deals with the attack, creating ice crystals that fall on each of the attackers and instantly knock them out. He mocks them for bothering to lure them there when they couldn't even attack properly. However, Abel argues the problem lies with Rio's standards. Abel then finds an alchemy tool, and when Rio insists on keeping it, Abel argues they need to hand it over as evidence. After tying up the suspicious attackers, Abel discovers they are rank C adventurers from J. Clare, the capital of Handle U. They wonder what they are doing so far from home, then leaves with Rio to report them to the city guard. On the other hand, as Phelps walks calmly through the streets, he is followed by the same knights from before, seeking revenge for their humiliation. As soon as they reach for their blades, they are suddenly paralyzed when Sheena appears behind them and incinerates them with a single spell called Inferno. The next day, a research expedition team arrives from the capital and meets with the guild leader. The discussion gets tense when Hugh complains about reopening the dungeon and even requests adventurers as escorts to go down there. The man from the investigation team, named Clive Staples, angrily explains the Minister of Internal Affairs is the one deciding on this research expedition, and he gave them full authority over it. An old man chairing the meeting intervenes, telling the two to stop arguing and apologizes to Hugh for the sudden seizure of the guild's food supplies, even offering compensation. Clive remains firm on his plan to reopen the guild, and Hugh accepts, which makes Clive smile. But before he can get too pleased, Hugh warns that if anything happens to Loon's adventurers, they won't be held responsible. The old man tells Clive the condition is fair and asks Hugh if they can pay the adventurers above standard rates. Hugh says that depends entirely on the adventurers and warns them to proceed into the dungeon with caution, as there is no telling what they might encounter there. Rio heads to where the Crimson Sword group is staying, hoping to find a decent cafeteria. At that moment, a girl runs out the door, bustling back and forth before running up to him and begging him to show her the way to the guild, as she has a letter to deliver. Rio doesn't want to give up his meal, but decides to be nice anyway and guides her there. At the guild, the girl hands the letter to the Crimson Sword group, explaining it is from Professor Hilarion. Abel opens it and finds Hilarion wants them to support the court mage in investigating the dungeon. When Rio points out the dungeon should remain closed, Abel explains it was because a rank A group with a first-class rank S adventurer disappeared inside after the last Great Tide Bore. But the research team got permission to explore it now. Rio says the smart choice would be to stay away and goes out to get something to eat. As he leaves, the girl thanks him, and when Rio points out she hasn't introduced herself, the girl says her name is Natalie Schwarzkopf. Her surname catches Lynn's attention, and she quickly realizes they have a famous water mage. Lynn is still curious about Rio's ice wall spell and asks Natalie if she knows it. But Natalie says no, and even she is surprised to hear such a spell even exists. Abel then orders his team to never get into a real fight with Rio, and even if they end up against him, they must surrender, as he is sure not even all of them together would stand a chance. He then tells Natalie that if she needs help and can't find them, she should look for Rio. Later that day, the research expedition team installs residual mana detectors that can pick up any trace of mana left in the environment. The old user of the team explains these detectors will send all their data to the analysis group working right outside the dungeon. That night, Rio's roommates return with 2 oars and receive a large amount of gold coins, which makes them happy. Ito says he is surprised the dungeon opened so quickly, and Rio explains only rank D adventurers or higher are being allowed for now. He also asks them to attend the briefing scheduled for tomorrow. As days pass, Abel travels for 3 days and reaches the 7th layer with his team, but they haven't encountered a single monster. Abel notices Clive and the Royal Central University group seem to be in a hurry, and Rhea explains they are working on a theory that says the monsters of the Great Tide Boar come from below the 38th floor, which is why they want to move quickly. The next day, during the adventurer briefing, the guild leader explains rank E and F groups aren't allowed to escort the investigation team. However, he assures them some alternative work has been arranged so they won't run out of money or starve. Rio then asks about the color intensity of the stones taken from the Great Tide Boar monsters, and Hugh reveals all the stones were pale, which seems very strange. Meanwhile, the research expedition team finally finds a huge random portal, which Clive decides to call a gate from now on. They believe the gate might be connected to somewhere else, and while installing instruments to examine it, everyone present suddenly disappears, and not even the analysis team can detect any trace of them. Emily calls her party members, making sure they are all okay, before turning to the old man named Arthur, who explains they have been relocated. The adventurers get restless, whispering about where they might be, until Director Clive steps in, ordering everyone to spread out and examine the area carefully, as danger could appear at any moment. One of the men approaches Clive, asking what happened, and he replies it must have been teleportation, which is why figuring out their current location is the top priority. They start to wonder if this was the gate's doing, but Clive discards the previous theory about monsters being restricted below level 38, deeming it false. Now, he strongly suspects the gate itself was the source of all the monsters. Even so, Clive admits this incident might turn out to be a hidden blessing, perhaps even leading them to discover the true root of the Great Tide Boar. A malicious smile spreads across his face as he imagines this discovery becoming his ladder to promotion as department head. Meanwhile, back in the city, with the sudden disappearance of readings, the analysis team starts to worry, as this is something that shouldn't have happened under normal circumstances. At that moment, Natalie manages to pick up a signal, and for a brief instant, it seems the missing group is on the 40th floor before the signal is lost again. At that moment, a man arrives looking for the person in charge and introduces himself as Christopher Blatt from the College of Magic. He claims to be the one officially organizing this investigation and someone acting directly under the king's orders, demanding to know if there is anything out of the ordinary or abnormal happening inside the dungeon. He explains the reason behind the sudden commotion, saying that while he was entering the dungeon along with the local adventurers he had hired, the moment the person in front of him crossed the threshold, everyone vanished into thin air. Matley argues they aren't the only ones whose readings disappeared, and Christopher Blatt immediately asks the person in charge if they confirmed other similar sightings, to which the answer comes that yes, but only on the 10th layer. Blatt then asks if they received any more signals from them afterward, and when Natalie replies it was only for an instant, he asks where exactly. And the answer comes that the signal they detected was from the 40th layer. Blatt becomes visibly uneasy, since that is very deep, as the furthest any adventurer has ever reached is only the 34th layer. And besides, the difficulty level beyond the 36th floor demands rank B groups at minimum. The person in charge then explains the rank B group, Crimson Sword, was the one escorting this team, so there is a very high chance they are all together there. He further adds he has already sent a messenger to the guild and asked the guildmaster to come as quickly as possible. At that moment, Natalie remembers something and runs out. Meanwhile, Hugh is approached by receptionist Nina, who informs him something is wrong with the dungeon. The entire investigation team has disappeared, and they meet him at the entrance immediately. Hugh tenses up, fearing Abel and the Crimson Sword might have disappeared too. He quickly prepares to leave, instructing her to have their contact gather at the dungeon checkpoint. He also instructs her to keep this information away from the adventurers until he can confirm what is really happening. On the other hand, while chaos stirs in the city, Rio is calmly wandering through the library, looking for books he wants to read. He climbs the stairs, hoping to catch a glimpse of Sarah, and, to his delight, she appears. He tells her he hoped to compare records of past eclipses and great tide bores. Sarah smiles and offers to help him track down the records. As they walk together to the right section, she asks if he thinks there might be a connection between eclipses and the great tide bore. Rio just refuses the question, but Sarah continues, insisting she believes his theory about the connection between the two might actually be correct. She explains that, in fact, there was an eclipse just before this great tide bore, but unlike the past, there was never a total eclipse like the one that happened this time. While Rio, to himself, knows he can't just tell her he was fighting an Akuma in the middle of that eclipse. When she looks at him with that curious gaze, almost as if asking what is really going through his head, he suddenly changes the subject by asking if she knows what determines the vividness of a magic stone. Sarah allows him to deflect the conversation and replies that the longer a monster lives, the more vivid its stone becomes. Rio agrees, adding he learned the same thing during his journey, but admits this fact made him question the shade of the monster stones during the bore, as most of them were pale. If the stones had been vivid, it would make sense, as it would mean only lower-level monsters came to the surface, but pale stones could only suggest the monsters had just spawned recently. He even argues the boss monsters also appeared to be recent spawns, and this leads him to form some theories of his own. After hearing him out, Sarah decides to take the boy to see the records of previous tide bores. Although she warns the documents might not be in the best condition. Back in the dungeon, as Abel talks to Arthur about the strange situation, he suggests it could be teleportation, and they might be on a different level of the dungeon or in a completely different place. He then asks the group if their instruments are working correctly, and it turns out even the tracking devices are working as usual, which makes Lynn excited, as it means they might still receive some help. Abel turns his attention to the old man and asks if something is bothering him, and Arthur replies it is the air itself. Arthur then turns to Rhea and asks if it reminds her of something, to which she explains it feels exactly like the inside of the sanctuary square, a spell only the highest-ranking priests were capable of casting. Rhea nods and argues it is the supreme form of defensive magic, known as a divine miracle. And furthermore, said it deflects all offensive spells as well as physical attacks. Abel argues that would mean they are trapped inside some kind of barrier, and Rhea agrees, since they can't feel where the boundary is. Abel then tells Lynn to use her probe to check, and she reports she can sense about 1,000 humans spaced 500 meters from each other, along with 50 life forms she has never encountered before. Arthur assumes Clive and his team must have also been teleported here, and Abel thinks it would be best to regroup with them. Meanwhile, the guild leader arrives near the dungeon and is briefed on what happened, including the report of a signal that briefly came from the 40th floor. He can't believe it, since even if they mobilize every adventurer in the city, none would be able to reach that far. Blatt then shares his concern about how these people disappeared so suddenly. He apologizes, saying neither he nor his subordinates can enter the dungeon under these circumstances, and the guild leader agrees with him, hoping the team eventually returns safely. Back in the dungeon, adventurers are being burned by purplish flames thrown by the monsters. They try to raise their barriers, shouting for everyone to get inside, while those left outside are quickly perishing. Fear spreads as the group realizes how easily these creatures are breaking through their barriers. Clive recognizes them immediately, confirming they are demons, the same beings he had only read about before. The monsters dominate everyone with little effort, and, although Abel and his team manage to reach safety, everyone feels a chilling wave of unease. Rhea explains demons are supposed to be stronger than any human. Lynn asks why such monsters would even appear here, but Arthur interrupts her and tells them to leave speculation for later. Taking command, he orders all mages to ready their attacks and immobilize the demons. Surprisingly, someone's dart spell proves highly effective, although Rhea remembers magic should have been useless against them. They try to come up with a plan, and Arthur calls for their second volley of magic attacks, though he worries they might run out of mana before the battle ends. Among the demons, Abel notices a figure that stands out, someone who seems to be the leader of them all. After the fourth Volator, mana begins to dwindle, so Abel takes Garen and his squad to the front for close combat. The Crimson Sword charges, perfectly using double casting to take down enemies one after another while Garen protects them. And this makes Arthur feel relieved, knowing the group truly lives up to its reputation. As his mana depletes further, only 6 monsters remain, and their leader reveals himself to be a demon prince, something Rhea explains as a being with different colored eyes. She tells them a demon prince is the immature form of a demon lord, one who has not yet awakened, and she further argues that only 4 of these beings can exist at the same time, with one destined to sit on the throne. Abel has also heard the old stories and quickly realizes this fight will be far from easy. Rhea insists no one except the chosen hero has ever managed to defeat a demon prince, but Abel refuses to back down and advances, hoping for some miracle. He turns to his friends, telling them not to lose hope. Compared to that time the terrifying griffin nearly made them wet their pants in fear, this doesn't look too bad to him. With that, he dives in headfirst, slicing through demons with ease, while the demon prince pushes everyone else aside, demanding a duel one-on-one. The immature demon lord charges right in front of Abel and forces him on the defensive. Abel gets anxious, as he can't even think of a way to succeed, with every spell being deflected with ease by the monster. The situation starts to get dire, as Clive and his group are engulfed in flames, while Abel's side of adventurers is also forced to retreat. Abel grips his blade tightly and unleashes his zero-spin sword skill, and just as he is about to slit the demon's throat, the creature escapes, leaving Abel frightened. He apologizes to Rio while accepting his death, but right then, a drop of water falls as Rio leaps into the fight, smiling at Abel and asking if he is hurt. Abel questions what the boy is doing there, and Rio simply explains he came to save him. He teases that he never thought such a weak monster could drive Abel to the brink of death. Even when Abel tells him this is a demon prince, Rio laughs it off as a cheap joke and reminds him this is no time for nonsense, as he can't believe something so weak could be related to a demon lord. Abel tries to make him get real, insisting it is truly an immature demon lord. But all Rio sees is a baby demon lord, barely worthy of being taken seriously. As Rio advances towards the creature, its minions attack him, but he easily deflects them with ice spears, before slitting their throats with his water jet skill. Rio then stands before the demon prince, draws his blade, and prepares to face the monster in battle. The story goes back a bit to when Natalie is running around looking for Rio. Ito tells her he is on the north side of the library, so she runs there and ends up bumping into him on the way. She immediately asks for his help, explaining the Crimson Sword disappeared inside the dungeon. Without wasting time, Rio forms an ice cart under her and drags it at high speed towards the dungeon while she screams at the ride. On the way, she informs him about what happened, and once Rio understands, he asks why she came to him specifically. Natalie replies Abel told her that if anything went wrong in his absence, she could count on Rio, which is why she ran to find him. Hearing this makes Rio smile, and then he runs straight for the dungeon gate. The guards at the gate tell him the dungeon is off limits, but Rio ignores them and surrounds himself with an ice wall before passing through them. Once he reaches the first floor, he remembers Natalie saying the noise came from the 40th floor. He realizes there is no time to waste, and therefore uses his abrasive jet to bore holes in the floor until he reaches the location. As the scene returns to the present, Rio is now facing the demon prince while mocking the monster. He readies his sword, and as the demon prince charges towards him, he casually comments the demon is too slow, and in an instant, cuts his neck, completely separating it from his body. This leaves Abel completely stunned, and he asks Rio what kind of move he just used. To their shock, the demon prince isn't finished. He picks up his severed head and reattaches it to his neck. Rio comments that although the demon seems resilient, it doesn't meet his standards of a true demon lord. Once again, Rio mocks him as a weakling, although he wonders if the demon even understands what he is saying. Before the demon can advance again, Rio puts its regeneration to the test, unleashing 256 abrasive jets. The water jets slice the demon into countless pieces, shattering its magic stone. Abel breathes a sigh of relief and thanks Rio for saving them, but Rio insists the only gratitude he will accept is a meal from the cafeteria. Abel quickly promises to treat him for a whole week. Just then, Lynn runs over and clings tightly to Abel, expressing how relieved she is to see him safe. Arthur steps forward and introduces himself as an advisor to the Royal Mage Department, explaining he represents the court investigation into the dungeon incident and sincerely thanking Rio for his help. Rio replies he is just glad he arrived in time, although, unfortunately, many lives were lost. Arthur assures him that as soon as his mages recover their mana, he will order the remains to be collected. Abel then turns to Rio and asks for his help to collect the Demon Prince's magic stone, explaining he wants to use the money from it to support the families of the fallen. Rio agrees to help without hesitation and asks about the demons he heard being called devils. Abel explains it was the first time they faced such beings too, as they hadn't appeared in the central provinces for over a millennium. Even so, Rio can't get the thought of the Akuma he fought a while back out of his head, while trying to connect her with these demons. When Abel notices his silence and asks what is wrong, Rio explains that when he came up from the 39th floor, he felt a strange field in the air, a sensation that suddenly disappeared once the Demon Prince was killed. And he also noticed something unusual through his probe spell that they should check upon returning. As Abel inspects the prince's magic stone, he finds it black, and Arthur admits during his adventurer days, he once encountered a demon in the western provinces, but was too weak to defeat it, making this his first time seeing a demon's stone as well. Lin adds that even the great temples of the central provinces have no records of such stones, and Arthur further notes these demons seem to resemble a theory that they might be able to use space-time magic. Elsewhere, a group of heroes sets fire to an altar, only for the Akuma Leonor to appear behind them. She casually explains she was just playing around, decided to take a peek, and somehow ended up inside a man-made altar. The heroes instantly mistake her for a demon lord and declare she is finished. Leonor tilts her head and asks if they really called her a demon lord. The group argues they built this altar with countless sacrifices precisely to summon one. Leonor giggles and asks who they are, considering they went to so much trouble just for this. A boy with a sword steps forward and introduces himself as Roman, the hero. Leonor bursts into laughter and says she will let him entertain her. In the blink of an eye, she appears before him and thrusts her hands straight into his abdomen. Seeing him collapse, she sighs in disappointment, calling the whole thing an anticlimax. As the rest of the group prepares to attack, Leonor appears before them and teases, asking if they shouldn't be more worried about their supposed hero. On her way back, she snatches the black-colored sacred jewel, commenting that at least taking it will make the trip worthwhile, since the fight itself was boring. Before leaving, she clarifies she is not a demon lord by any means, and even tells them there are humans who are on the same level of strength as her. Remembering Rio, she smiles sideways and tells Roman he should at least aim to become the strongest human. Her words leave the hero group completely shaken, especially because she adds there are humans out there 10,000 times stronger than him. Back in the dungeon, Rio and the others meet up with the adventurers hired by Clive before resuming their investigation, where they discover a cracked black orb that seems connected to the strange anomaly Rio had sensed earlier. Arthur admits he has never seen anything like it and seals it inside a barrier bag where no mana can pass, considering it is their only piece of evidence. On the way back to the surface, Abel thanks Rio once more. But Rio reminds him of his promise to feed him for a whole week, even mentioning Kurga as part of the deal, and warns, half-jokingly, that if Abel forgets, he will chop him into smaller pieces than the demon they fought. When they return to the surface, the guild leader praises their work, and Abel thanks Natalie for bringing Rio. Hugh feels relieved to see Abel alive and wishes he would take safer jobs on the surface. But his relief quickly turns into scolding as he reprimands Rio for ignoring the guards and running headfirst into the dungeon. Rio apologized, but Arthur intervenes and tells the guild leader they are only here because of Rio. Hugh gets startled and demands an explanation, and Arthur takes him to the tent to explain everything. There, Arthur explains to Hugh that, besides the demon prince, nearly 50 demons were waiting for them inside. Hugh argues that shouldn't be a shock, since it was Arthur along with Abel's group. But Arthur admits that, despite Abel's strength, he almost lost his life to the demon prince. And by pure luck, Rio appeared at the perfect moment and saved their group from certain death. Arthur turns to the guild leader and asks who this boy really is. And as Arthur lays out everything he knows about him, the two silently agree that such an unprecedented mage must remain on their side. With that in mind, they decide to keep Rio hidden from those brainless aristocrats, ensuring there are no official records of him achieving anything. As the scene changes, Rio charges ahead with his roommates struggling to keep up, insisting the most important thing is just to keep moving, while he easily outpaces them. Cutting through an alley, he gets restless, wishing for a real battle, unlike the one with the demon prince that ended before it even began. But the sudden smell of curry attracts him and leads him straight to Sarah. She greets him with a smile, insisting there is no better place for curry than in Loon, and invites him to sit. Both order medium spicy curry, and while they chat, Sarah finds out Rio registered directly at rank D, which she finds impressive. Once their dishes arrive, they enjoy the meal together before leaving the restaurant, where Rio asks if she is an adventurer, since he never saw her at the guild. Sarah explains she now works as a fencing instructor for the Marquis Loon's Order of Knights, and when Rio reacts with slight surprise, she leans closer, telling him he is much stronger than he looks, and even inviting him for a mock battle. As she takes him to the training field, Sarah teases that he seems to be itching for a fight, and Rio asks how she knows he also uses a sword. She explains his walk and posture give him away, and adds she is also a blade and magic user like him. Without wasting time, she asks if he is ready and charges at him. The duel quickly turns into a heated contest, and Sarah gets excited realizing how skilled Rio actually is. She argues not even the knights managed to avoid her onslaught, but he did, which compels her to go all out. Rio struggles to keep up and barely dodges her barrage of attacks until finally his blade is cut in half, forcing him to surrender. Sarah runs and hugs him tight, praising him as amazing. Rio asks if she was using wind magic to boost her movements and admits it was impressive. Sarah asks the boy who taught him such skills. When Rio mentions his mentor, she quickly realizes he is talking about the Fairy King. Seeing his confusion about how she knows, she explains elves are half fairies, which makes it easier for her to tell, especially after recognizing the cloak the Fairy King gave him. Fascinated, she tells Rio the Fairy King is more legend than reality for most people, that here is someone he actually taught fencing to. Just then, It is time for Sarah to go to Master Alfonso's class, the Marquise's grandson. So she excuses herself and asks Riolita to guide Rio back, mentioning he is important to her. As Riolita leads him away, she can't get Sarah's words about Rio being important out of her head. On the way, Hugh suddenly appears with a wagon and offers Rio a ride. During the trip, Hugh thanks him for what he did, but makes it clear he cannot ignore a guard's order. So, as punishment, he assigns Rio the job of making a round trip to Whitnish. But this is where this video ends. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.